Billionaire Richard saw the moment through the cracked door of his study. His wife Victoria's hand rose like lightning and cracked across the cheek of the new, innocent maid, Amelia. The sound of the slap echoed like a gunshot in the vast, silent marble hall. Richard's heart seized. He knew his wife was a monster, but he was afraid of that monster. And in that moment, by remaining silent, he understood that he was also a part of her crime. He flinched, pulling back from the door as if the blow had struck him instead. He quickly, quietly, closed a heavy oak door, the soft click of the latch sounding like the ceiling of a tomb. His study, usually a sanctuary of leather-bound books and quiet contemplation, suddenly felt like a coward's hiding place. He sank into his high-backed armchair, the plush leather offering no comfort. His hands were trembling. Outside in the hall, he could hear Victoria's voice, low and venomous, spitting more insults at the crying girl. He couldn't make out the words, but he could imagine them, each one a poisoned dart designed to find its mark in Amelia's spirit. He knew he should have stormed out there. He should have stood between them, shielded the girl, and put an end to the tyranny that reigned in his own home. He was Richard Thorne, a man whose name moved markets and made politicians tremble. But in the presence of his wife, he was just Richard, a man who had long ago traded his courage for a life of quiet, opulent misery. He was a king in the boardroom and a prisoner in his own mansion. This latest incident had been brewing for days, ever since Amelia had arrived. She was barely 20, with wide, hopeful eyes and a gentle spirit that seemed utterly out of place in the cold grandeur of the Thorne estate. She had come to the city to earn money for her mother's desperately needed heart surgery, a fact Richard knew from her application file. He had been the one to hire her, moved by the quiet dignity she projected during her interview. He had seen a flicker of the same light he had once loved in others, a light Victoria had spent the last decade extinguishing in him. Victoria had hated her from the first moment. She saw Amelia's innocence not as a virtue, but as a flaw to be corrupted, a smooth surface to be marred. Her cruelty began with small, insidious tests. She would give Amelia a series of complex, contradictory orders, then berate her for failing to complete them. She would accidentally drop a full glass of red wine on a priceless white rug and watch with a smug smile as Amelia spent hours on her hands and knees, scrubbing at the stain. Richard had watched it all from a distance. He would sometimes try to mitigate the damage in secret. When Victoria complained that the silver wasn't polished to her satisfaction, Richard would slip into the dining room later that night and finish the job himself before the head butler could see. When he heard Amelia crying softly in the laundry room after a particularly vicious tongue-lashing from Victoria, he had the chef send her a tray with a warm meal, pretending it was a standard staff perk. They were the small, cowardly acts of a man who wanted to be good but was terrified of the cost. Today's incident had been the most trivial of all. Victoria was hosting a charity luncheon, and Amelia was helping serve. As she leaned over to place a dish on the table, her sleeve had brushed against a water glass, causing a few drops to spill onto the polished mahogany. It was a tiny, insignificant accident, but for Victoria, it was an unforgivable public offense, a stain on her perfect hostess persona. She had waited until her guests had left, her anger simmering beneath a mask of polite smiles. As soon as the last car pulled away, she had cornered Amelia in the main hall. Richard, hearing her raised voice from his study, had opened his door just a crack. He had heard Victoria hiss, "You clumsy, worthless little fool. Do you have any idea how you embarrass me? You are here to be invisible, to be perfect. You are not paid to make mistakes." Amelia, terrified, had whispered, "I am so sorry, madam. It will not happen again." "Sorry." Victoria had laughed, a sound with no warmth. "Sorry doesn't fix your incompetence." And then he saw it. Victoria's hand rising, the flash of her diamond rings under chandelier light, and the brutal, shocking impact. He saw Amelia stumble backward, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock and pain before they filled with tears. Now, sitting in his study, the echo of that sound was all he could hear. The silence that followed was even worse. It was the sound of his own failure. He looked around the room, at the artifacts of his success, the awards, the expensive paintings, the photos of him with world leaders. They all seemed to mock him. What was the point of being a king if you allowed a tyrant to rule your own castle? He knew what he had become. He was an accomplice. His silence was not just weakness. It was an endorsement. It was a permission slip for Victoria to continue her reign of terror. He closed his eyes, and the image of Amelia's tear-streaked face was burned into the back of his eyelids. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was only the beginning. The slap was not an end. It was an opening declaration of war. And he, by hiding in his room, had just chosen his side. The days that followed the slap were thick with new, poisonous silence. The vast mansion, which had always felt empty, now felt suffocating. Amelia moved through its halls like a frightened mouse, her eyes perpetually downcast, starting at every shadow, flinching at every raised voice. Victoria, on the other hand, was emboldened. Richard's cowardice had been a green light, a confirmation of her absolute dominion over this house and everyone in it. She seemed to draw energy from Amelia's fear, her cruelty becoming more refined, more psychological. The physical violence did not repeat itself. Instead, Victoria began a campaign of subtle, soul-crushing torment. It began with the antique diamond brooch, a family heirloom from Richard's grandmother. One morning, Victoria let out a theatrical gasp from her dressing room. "It's gone!" she cried, her voice carrying through the house. "My grandmother's brooch. It was right here on my vanity last night." She didn't accuse Amelia directly. She didn't have to. As the staff was gathered, Victoria's eyes remained fixed on the terrified girl. "It's so strange," Victoria said, tapping a manicured finger to her chin. "It disappears just after we hire a new girl from the village. What an unfortunate coincidence." The insinuation was clear. The other staff members, afraid for their own jobs, began to look at Amelia with suspicion and distance. The final humiliation was the search of Amelia's small, neat room. Victoria watched with a satisfied smirk as the head of security went through Amelia's few, humble belongings. Her worn clothes, a small stack of books, and a faded photograph of her smiling mother. They found nothing, of course, but the violation left Amelia feeling naked and utterly alone. Victoria forbade the other staff from speaking to her unless it was work-related, effectively placing her in solitary confinement within the bustling household. Richard witnessed all of this in the periphery, his guilt a constant, bitter taste in his mouth. He knew Victoria had orchestrated the entire drama. He knew she had likely hidden the brooch herself. He spent his days locked in his study, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the storm of self-loathing in his mind. He was paralyzed by a fear he could no longer justify. Was this lifestyle, this cold luxury, worth the price of his own soul? The turning point came one evening. He was walking through the library, a room Amelia had just finished dusting. On a small writing desk in the corner, he saw a single sheet of paper she had forgotten. It was a half-written letter to her mother. Curiosity, mingled with a desperate need to understand the girl his wife was so intent on breaking, got the better of him. He picked it up. "Dearest Mama," the letter began in neat, careful script. "I hope you are feeling stronger today. Please don't worry about me. My new job is wonderful. The Thorne family is so kind and generous. The house is like a palace, and they treat me with such respect. I am saving almost all of my salary, and I am sure I will have enough for your operation very soon. Just keep fighting. I love you." Reading those words was like a physical blow to Richard's heart. The girl was living in a state of constant terror and humiliation, yet in this letter, she was a painter of beautiful lies. She was protecting her sick mother from the ugly truth, absorbing all the pain herself so that her mother could hold on to hope. It was an act of such pure, selfless love that it made Richard's own inaction, his own self-preservation, seem utterly grotesque. Isabella had possessed that same strength, that same capacity to shield others from pain. In that moment, Amelia was no longer just a maid to him. She was a reminder of the goodness he had thought was lost to the world, the goodness he had failed to protect in his own wife. That night, something in Richard Thorne shifted. The fear was still there, but for the first time, it was overshadowed by a new, unfamiliar feeling, a cold, quiet rage. He would not be a coward any longer. His rebellion began with a small, calculated act of defiance. The next afternoon, While Victoria was at one of her charity luncheons, Richard walked into her dressing room. He knew his wife's habits, her vanities. He went to her enormous jewelry armoire and opened a small, velvet-lined drawer where she kept her lesser-worn pieces. Tucked away in a corner, beneath a silk scarf, was a missing brooch. He took it, went downstairs to the grand drawing room, and carefully snagged one of its prongs on the heavy silk drapery near the window, a place Amelia would never have been allowed to clean. When Victoria returned, he waited a while, then called out to her, "Darling, look what I found. Your grandmother's brooch. It must have caught on the curtain when you opened it this morning." Victoria stared at the brooch, then at Richard. Her eyes narrowed. She knew. She couldn't prove it, but she knew he had intervened. It was a silent challenge, a move in a chess game she hadn't realized he was willing to play. She snatched the brooch from his hand without a word of thanks. A secret alliance was born. Richard began to help Amelia from the shadows. He overheard her on the phone with the hospital, her voice breaking as she learned the initial deposit for her mother's surgery was more than she had expected. The next day, he accidentally left a thick envelope on a hallway table he knew Amelia was scheduled to polish. Inside was the exact amount of deposit in cash, with a small and signed note that simply said, "For your mother, a friend." Amelia found the envelope and broke down in tears of disbelief and gratitude, thinking it was a miracle. From his study, watching through the slightly ajar door, Richard felt a warmth spread through his chest that no business deal had ever given him. But Victoria was not a fool. She noticed the subtle shifts. She saw the fear in Amelia's eyes begin to be replaced by a glimmer of hope. She felt Richard's newfound spine in the way he met her gaze for a moment longer than usual. She knew she was losing control, and it made her furious. She decided it was time to crush Amelia's spirit once and for all. She found Amelia's letter. She had been searching the girl's room again, and this time she found the finished, sealed envelope addressed to her mother. Victoria tore it open and read it, her lips curling into a cruel sneer. This was the perfect weapon. She summoned Amelia to the library when the girl entered. Victoria was sitting in a large armchair, the letter held delicately in her hand. "Such a beautiful letter," Victoria began, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Such a talented liar. The Thorne family is so kind and generous. Really." Amelia's blood ran cold. "Please, madam, that is for my mother. She is very ill." "Oh, I know," Victoria cooed. "And I was thinking, she must be so worried about you. I think I should call her. Put her mind at ease. I'll tell her the truth about her precious daughter, that you are a clumsy, incompetent thief who is about to be fired and thrown onto the street with nothing. I wonder what a shock like that would do to her weak heart." This was it, the ultimate act of cruelty. Victoria was holding the life of Amelia's mother in her hands, and she was enjoying every second of the girl's terror. Amelia fell to her knees, sobbing. "No, please, I beg you. Anything but that. I'll do anything." Richard had been in the adjoining conservatory, and he had heard everything. He had stood frozen, listening to his wife's voice descend into pure evil, the threat to an innocent, sick woman, the sadistic pleasure she took in the girl's pain. It was a line that had finally been crossed. The fear he had felt for a decade was burned away by a white-hot wave of disgust and rage. He stepped out from the shadows of the doorway. His face was a calm, cold mask, but his eyes were burning with fire Victoria had not seen since their earliest days together. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice was low and steady, and it cut through the room like a shard of ice. "That's enough, Victoria." Victoria spun around, shocked to see him there. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty, of fear, appeared in her eyes. The power dynamic in the house had just shifted permanently. The reckoning was about to begin. Victoria stared at her husband, momentarily stunned into silence. The man who had just spoken was not the passive, compliant Richard she had spent a decade molding into her perfect, spineless accessory. This man's eyes held a cold fire she hadn't seen since their courtship, a dangerous glint of the ruthless businessman he was to the outside world, but had never been to her. She quickly recovered, her shock replaced by venomous rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "How dare you interrupt me?" This has nothing to do with you. This is a matter between me and this worthless little servant. Richard took a slow, deliberate step into the room, placing himself between his wife and the still sobbing Amelia on the floor. It has everything to do with me, he said, his voice calm but unyielding. This is my house. Amelia is my employee, and you are my wife, and what you have just done is unforgivable. Victoria let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Unforgivable? I am teaching the help a lesson in discipline, something you are clearly too weak to do. Now get out of my way. Richard, I am not finished. Oh, yes, you are, he replied, his voice dropping even lower. You are finished. He looked past her, his eyes finding Amelia's. Amelia, he said, his voice softening for a moment. Please rise. Go to your room and lock the door. No one will bother you again tonight. Amelia, confused and terrified, scrambled to her feet and fled the room, her sobs echoing in the hallway. Now they were alone. Have you lost your mind? Victoria shrieked, her facade of control crumbling. You take her side against me? Your own wife? I will ruin you. Richard, I will tell everyone you've gone mad, that you're having an affair with a help. I will drag your precious name through the mud. Richard didn't even flinch. He simply walked to the library desk and picked up the phone. This house has 32 security cameras, Victoria, the ones you had installed for security. They record everything. The incident with the brooch you lost, the cook you fired for giving this girl a kind word, and, of course, the last 10 minutes in this room. Victoria's face went white. I also know about the envelope of cash Amelia mysteriously found, he continued, his voice relentless. And I know about your little games of changing her duties at the last second to make her fail. I have been a coward, Victoria, but I have not been blind. He put the phone down. This marriage is over. You will not contact Amelia's mother. You will not speak to Amelia again. You will pack your bags and be out of this house by noon tomorrow. Our lawyers will handle the divorce. You will receive the exact amount stipulated in our prenuptial agreement and not a penny more. If you contest this, if you try to slander me or this innocent girl, I will release the footage from every camera in this house to every news outlet in the country. Your reign is over. Her power had always been derived from his fear. With that fear gone, she was nothing. Her face, stripped of its arrogant mask, looked shockingly pathetic. She stared at him, speechless, her mind racing for a threat, an angle, an escape route, but finding none. He had checkmated her, without another word. She turned and swept out of the room, her empire of cruelty having crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. Richard stood alone in the quiet library, his heart pounding. The confrontation had drained him, but for the first time in years, he felt clean. He felt free. But his work was not done. He went to the attic and knocked softly on Amelia's door. Amelia? It's Richard. Please, may I come in? After a long pause, the door creaked open. Amelia stood there, her face tear-stained, her eyes filled with fear and confusion. He didn't enter her small room, but stood in the doorway, a humble supplicant. I have come to apologize, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his shame. There are no words to describe how sorry I am, not just for what she did, but for everything I failed to do. I saw the cruelty. I saw your pain, and I did nothing. I was a coward, and my silence made me her accomplice. There is no excuse for my actions, and I will not ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Amelia just stared at him, silent. But I can try to make things right, he continued. Your mother's surgery. I want you to know that it will be taken care of. All of it. The best doctors, the best care. You will not have to worry about a single bill. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. And this is for you. It's a trust fund for your education. Go to university. Become a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, whatever you dream of becoming. You are a kind and resilient young woman. Amelia, you deserve a life of your own choosing, not one of servitude. He placed the envelope gently on a small table by the door. You are free, he said softly. You never have to be afraid in this house again. He turned to leave, giving her space. Mr. Thorne, her small voice called out. He stopped and turned back. "Why?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Richard looked at her, and for the first time, he gave a true, sad smile. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. "And it's been a very long time since I've done the right thing." Epilogue, 6 months later. The Thorne mansion was no longer a cold, silent prison. It was just a house. Victoria was gone, living a life of quiet obscurity in Europe, shunned by the high society that had once adored her. Richard had sold many of the priceless, soulless artifacts that filled the rooms, donating the money to charities. He had started a foundation in his family's name, dedicated to helping people who had been crushed by the system, people like Amelia. He was in his study, the same room he had once hidden in when the mail arrived. Among the bills and business letters was a small postcard. It was a picture of a bright, sunny university campus. He turned it over. The handwriting was neat and familiar. "Dear Mr. Thorne," it read, "Mama's surgery was a complete success. She is getting stronger every day. My nursing classes are challenging, but I love them. I wanted to thank you again. Not for the money, though it gave us a new life. I wanted to thank you for what you did that night. You showed me that people can change, and that courage is never truly lost. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment to be found. I hope you have found your peace. Sincerely, Amelia." Richard held the postcard for a long time. He walked over the grand window and looked out, not at a kingdom he owned, but at a world full of possibilities. For the first time in over a decade, a genuine, peaceful smile touched his lips. He had finally paid the price of his silence, and in doing so had bought back his own soul.